Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be going over this article, which is actually by Elder Russell M. Nelson, and this is back in 1997. It was a CES fireside at BYU, and it pretty much, after doing that video yesterday, I kind of only skimmed through this one, so I hadn't got all the details out of this, so that's why I'm doing this video now. But as I studied this article, it basically, for me personally, it kind of brought about the death knell, I think, of the idea that there's a group of the 10 lost tribes that are in the North Pole, South Pole, Moon, space, wherever. Basically, at this point, I'm now only I still am open to that idea, but only yesterday I think I said 10% open to that idea, and now I'm down to 0.1% open open to that idea, and it's because of this talk, or this article right here. All right, so if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video. If you like it, hit the notification bell, leave your comments, and also share the video with anyone that you think will enjoy it. Okay, so this article is the Exodus Repeated. This was published in the Ensign as well, 1999, July. And Elder Nelson, or President Nelson, whatever, he basically drew similarities and parallels between the original Exodus out of Egypt and then the restoration and what happened with Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young leading the saints to Utah. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, I need to go over a couple scriptures, like two of the main scriptures that are used as arguments for a literal group of Israelites in the northern countries that are heading to the world that will miraculously come back and surprise everybody. Right, so we're in Jeremiah 23. I'm going to read verses 7 and 8. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, the Lord liveth, that which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but the Lord liveth, which brought up and which led seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all countries, whither I have driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. Okay, so the argument here is that this group right here, that are in the north country, quote unquote, is separate from just the general dispersion of Israel throughout all the world and all the countries. Okay, so it's my understanding that that's the basic belief from that point of view. All right, so keep this in mind. Okay, keep this in mind. Pay attention to the wording here. Shall know that they shall no more say, they'll no more talk about Egypt, but they're going to be talking about this event right here. Okay, now let's hop on over to Doctrine and Covenants section 133. This is another one of the big scriptures in verse 26. And now, as I read this, I'm gonna substitute some words here. So just look at it from this other point of view, which you may or may not have done yet. But and they who are in the north countries, which is plural, and so you could say they who are in the British Isles, Western Europe, shall come in remembrance before the Lord, and their prophets, Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, shall hear his voice, and shall no longer stay themselves, and they shall smite the rocks. And this is basically a reference to Moses when he smote the rock in Exodus. They were thirsting for water, complaining. He smote the rock, water came out, they were able to drink. And spiritually speaking, that's basically getting life, or getting a life-giving substance from a stone, right? A solid foundation, something that's solid. We know that that Christ is the water of life, and you think about the sacrament with the bread and the water, right? So let's go back here. So their prophets, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, John Taylor, etc., shall no longer stay themselves, because there's been a great apostasy. Just like Revelation said, the church had fled after the child was born, which was Christ and his initial kingdom that began in the New Testament, but because of apostasy and because the great dragon was waiting to devour the child, she fled into the wilderness. There was the great apostasy, but then she came back. So the prophets, the church, so to speak, shall no longer stay themselves, and they shall smite the rocks, or in other words, bring back the gospel and the ordinances of salvation and so forth, and the ice shall flow down at their presence. Now pay attention to this, because this is going to be brought up in this article. And the ice shall flow down at their presence, and a highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep. All right, so it seems like an icy highway, or a highway brought up out of the water. And I've already done videos about this. I'm not going to go deep into this. It seems like when you click on this footnote, it takes you to scriptures from Isaiah that are referring to the highway of righteousness, or the covenant path, not a literal highway. So let's now go ahead and go to the article. All right. Many instructive parallels exist between the Exodus from Egypt of the Israelites under Moses and the Exodus from the United States of the Latter-day Saint pioneers under Brigham Young, right? Because when they left, they were leaving the United States behind and going into what was then Mexico, or Mexican territory. We can learn much from these stalwarts of ancient and modern Israel. Generally, historical sketches and pageants have portrayed well what the pioneers did, but only a few writers have delved deeply enough to explain why. Even fewer have reported the similarities between the pioneer trek and the Exodus from Egypt. I want to stop right there. So again, this whole talk, or this article right here, is comparing those two events. And think back to Jeremiah 23, where it says we're no longer to be talking about the Exodus from Egypt, but we're going to be talking about the gathering in of Israel out of the north country and all the countries, wherever they were scattered. Okay. Okay, so even fewer have reported the similarities between the pioneer trek and the Exodus from Egypt. An obvious likeness is that both groups had their inland sea of salt water and Jordan River. That, of course, is referring to Great Salt Lake. This probably won't be anything new to anybody. I think most people are aware of this, but you have essentially a similarity to the land of Israel, only upside down, right? The Great Salt Lake would be the Dead Sea. There's the Jordan River that goes between the Great Salt Lake and Utah Lake, which is a fresh body of water. Utah Lake would be analogous to or correspond to the Sea of Galilee. So, and even the position of Salt Lake right here is, like, relatively speaking, in the same location that Jerusalem would be if you flip the whole thing upside down. You even have down here Cedar City, which, if you were to put the map over this, this way would be north down here. And you know about the cedars of Lebanon, right? That's directly north. Lebanon is directly north of Salt Lake. So there's a lot of, like, really interesting things going on there. Lots of similarities. Let's hop on over to Israel just to kind of show you. You know, here's the Dead Sea right here. Here's Jerusalem in the Salt Lake City position. You have the River Jordan and then the Sea of Galilee right there. So he is referring to that similarity. All right. An obvious likeness is that both groups have their inland sea of salt water, the Dead Sea and the Great Salt Lake, and a Jordan River. Excuse me. But there were many other very significant similarities. Ancient Israel and modern Israel are linked arm in arm. All right, so check this out. The Josephs. In uh, ancient Israel had leaders before Moses, and modern Israel had a prophet president before Brigham Young. The predecessors for each group also bore a resemblance to each other. A name common to both was Joseph. Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, and the prophet Joseph Smith. Few men in the Old Testament are of greater importance to Latter-day Saints than Joseph of Egypt. Many of us claim lineage through him, through his sons Ephraim or Manasseh. The Book of Mormon reveals. A part of the remnant of the coat of Joseph was preserved and had not decayed. Even as this remnant of garment hath been preserved, so shall a remnant of the seed be preserved by the hand of God and taken unto himself. And that's in Alma 46:24. The pioneers were remnants of that precious seed, and I don't think here he's talking about in an adoption sense, right? Um, you could consider all these different countries throughout the world, including Europe, to be Gentile nations, and that's correct because I guess it depends on the sense that you're talking. Definitely from a Jewish point of view, they're definitely Gentile nations. From an LDS point of view, you could say that as well, because they're not members of the church, the vast majority of them. But even so, you do have what seem to be pockets of the 10 lost tribes throughout the world, like actual populations, not just like generic. Everyone probably has some DNA from Israel. No, I'm talking about like groups that had actually maintain their identity at least for some amount of time and still to this day have some kind of tradition or just simply that maybe they forgot who they were, but there's still those like DNA clusterings and higher concentrations of Israelite DNA. And again, I know I've brought it up many times, but we all know that Joseph Smith was a pure Ephraimite, and he came from the British Isles. So it's probably reasonable to believe that there's a lot of Israelite blood in that location specifically. So the pioneers, again, many of whom would have been of English descent, English, Welsh, Scottish, whatever, Irish too, I'm sure, were remnants of that precious seed. So it would seem that in some countries up in the north, right? So here's Israel. You go up north, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, Poland, Germany. You get to the British Isles, and yeah, it is up north. And I'm going to do a separate video about the belief that there was a group of Israelites that settled here in the United Kingdom. Okay, they knew that Joseph Smith had been chosen by the Lord to take up the labors of the tribe of Joseph, son of Jacob. Centuries earlier, Joseph had prophesied of Joseph Smith and had described their kinship. Okay, I think I'm actually going to skip down here. Anciently, when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph. What he saith to you, do. In the latter days, people starving for nourishment that only the gospel can provide are again to be fed by Joseph. He was the one that brought it back. He was the prophet that was chosen to bring back that nourishment of the gospel that had been gone for nearly 2,000 years. The Lord declared that this generation shall have my word through Joseph Smith. Today, we may feast upon the words of Christ because of Joseph Smith. Okay, so interesting similarity there between the two Josephs and starvation. In the first story, it being literal starvation. In the second story, spiritual. Okay, Moses and Brigham Young. Moses and Brigham Young had much in common. Okay, now this is where we start thinking about this Jeremiah 23 section, right? First, we're We're thinking and remembering the Exodus out of Egypt, which the Jews still do to this day religiously. And then us, Latter-day Saints, we are currently engaged in verse 8 right here, gathering scattered Israel. All right, and then again, it goes without saying, but I think that we need to put a lot of confidence and put more weight, or that this article comes with a lot more weight, because even though he was an apostle at the time, the Lord knew that he was going to become president of the church, and he was thinking about things just like this. All right, so let's think about Jeremiah 23 as we read about Brigham Young and Moses. They were astute followers before they became great leaders. Moses had been prepared in the courts of Egypt and had gained much experience in military and other responsibilities. Brigham Young was likewise prepared for his leadership role. In the march of Zion's camp, he had observed the leadership of the prophet Joseph Smith under difficult conditions. Brigham Young aided in the removal of the prophet Joseph from Kirtland. He also directed the move of the persecuted saints from Missouri to Nauvoo. Okay. For both the Israelites and the saints, civil and ecclesiastical law were unified under one head. Moses bore that responsibility for his people. Brigham Young, the modern Moses, okay, led the Latter-day Saints movement west with the Lord's blessing. Okay, so just explicitly right here, Russell M. Nelson is calling Brigham Young, quote, the modern Moses. Let's read this scripture again. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, the Lord liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But the Lord liveth, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, England, Britain, whatever, and from all countries whither I have driven them, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, the America, Japan, all over the world, and they shall dwell in their own land. All right. There's a footnote here, which takes us right here. Let me see if I can. Oh gosh, this stupid thing that I can't move. Sorry, there's this like timer here to tell me how long this video has been going for, and I can't move it. It blocks. Okay, whatever. So, President Spencer W. Kimball wrote, quote, since Adam there have been many exoduses and promised lands. Abraham, Jared, Moses, Lehi, and others led groups. How easy is it to accept those distant in time as directed by the Lord, yet the ones near at hand as human calculations and decisions, right? So in other words, hindsight is 20/20, but when you're actually in it, it's like, well, are they really guiding us correctly? And there's kind of been a lot of that going on lately in the church, I feel like. Let us consider for a moment the great trek of the Mormon refugees from Illinois to Salt Lake Valley. Few, if any, great movements equal it. Few, if any, great movements equal it. So Spencer W. Kimball also is comparing the Exodus to the Pioneer Trek. And again, that seems to echo and maybe be in fulfillment of this right here. Jeremiah 23, 7 and 8. We frequently hear that Brigham Young led the people to make new tracks in a desert and to climb over mountains seldom scaled, and to ford and wade unbridged rivers, and to traverse a hostile Indian country. And while Brigham Young was the instrument of the Lord, it was not he but the Lord of heaven who led modern Israel across the plains to their promised land. All right, so let's continue on. Moses and Brigham Young followed parallel patterns of governance. Brigham Young organized the large group of men, women, and children for an orderly migration to the west. We lament that leaders of both groups had to endure dissension from their close associates. On occasion, Moses encountered opposition from his beloved Aaron and Miriam. Latter-day leaders also suffered contention among their trusted associates. Nevertheless, the same unified pattern of government will come again when the Lord shall be king over all the earth in the millennium, and govern from Zion and Jerusalem. The journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai took about 3 months. The journey from winter quarters to the valley of the Great Salt Lake also took about 3 months. 111 days. That's an interesting number. This kind of gets, I don't know if you'd say into numerology, but people have noted how a year ago when President Nelson did that video asking us to do 7 days of thanks, that the video lasted 11 minutes. It was in the 11th month, which was November. 11 and, repetitions of 1, 111 days. It seems like there might be something to that, but I'm not going to go into that really, but just something to note. The destination for each group was described by the Lord as a land flowing with milk and honey. The pioneers turned their wilderness into a fruitful field and made the desert blossom as a rose, precisely as prophesied by Isaiah centuries before. Okay, miracles shared. Both groups shared many miracles that are memorialized annually. The celebration of Passover relates to the travels of the ancient Israelites, and each July we repeat legendary stories of our pioneers, right? Because they entered the valley on July 24th, 1947, the days of 47. In Utah, it's actually I lived there. That's where I grew up and lived until my late 20s. But it's basically like another 4th of July. They do fireworks and there's parades and we celebrate it. And I guess even outside of Utah, it's celebrated within the church. I don't know if it's like church-wide. I know that we just did it this year here in South Central Kansas, where I'm at. So, excuse me. So it's interesting. Both groups traversed deserts, mountains, and valleys of untamed wilderness. Ancient Israelites left Egypt via the parted waters of the Red Sea as by dry land. Okay, now check this out, okay? This is going to have to do with Doctrine and Covenants 133. I get the impression from what we're about to read that President Nelson has the point of view that that he knows what this highway of ice would be, right? So let's just read this part again. And they who are in the north countries shall come in remembrance before the Lord, and their prophets shall hear his voice, and shall no longer stay themselves. And they shall smite the rocks, and the ice shall flow down at their presence, and an highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep. Okay? All right, so what does President Nelson say? So he just talked about the Israelites. They left Egypt via the parted waters of the Red Sea as by dry land. The pioneers left the United States crossing the wide waters of the Mississippi River, which I think you could say the Great Deep. It's a very big river, frozen to become a highway of ice. A highway of ice, as Brigham Young, the modern day Moses, was leading them in the wilderness, just like Israel, across deserts, mountains, valleys, untamed wilderness, to the promised land. Okay, looking back at Jeremiah 23, the two events. Now, the book of Exodus reports that quail were miraculously provided to feed the hungry people of ancient Israel. The pioneers had an equivalent experience, which I actually didn't know about this. After the last of them had been driven out of Nauvoo, many were sick and some died. Their provisions were meager. On the river bottoms near Montrose, Iowa, on the 9th of October, 1846, many quail miraculously flew into camp. The quail were cooked and fed to some 640 destitute people. Um, there's actually a footnote that I guess there was like a piece of art that was done. It's called Catching Coils, and here it is here. This was like I couldn't find a higher resolution image, so hopefully you can see this okay. But it's really interesting because, um, you know, recently in videos I've been talking about the Jewish feast days, one of them being Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, where they literally they build these kind of booths, tents, booths, and during that week of Sukkot, there's I haven't gone into it like too deeply, but I think they're supposed to spend as much time as possible outside in the tent or the booth, in remembrance of wandering in the wilderness after the Exodus out of Egypt, and while wandering in the wilderness. And when you look at this picture, it's really interesting because, here you have these kind of like really booth-like looking things. I don't know what you call this. You do have like a wagon back here, and then somebody back here has a tent set up. But well, and I mean that corresponds as well, I guess. But it's like literally the same thing playing out. And here you have all the quail, and them catching the quail and eating them and stuff. I find that fascinating. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Okay, so let's get back to this. Okay. It was also miraculous that a permanent settlement survived in the Valley of the Great Salt Lake. The seagulls that saved the crops were part of that miracle, and I'm sure everybody knows that story. All of a sudden there were all these crickets, and they were just a pestilence and destroying crops, and suddenly just a ton of seagulls came and they ate the crickets. God preserved ancient Israel from plagues sent upon Egypt. Similarly, God preserved the saints from the plague of the United States Civil War, which caused more American deaths than any other war. All right. And then there's just a little bit more to go. Spiritual strengths shared. They had to leave their homes and earthly possessions and learn to rely wholly upon God. Protection was provided for ancient Israel by the Lord, who, quote, went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire. The same has been said of the divine watch care afforded to the pioneers. That's according to History of the Church, and then also Thomas S. Monson. So you think of that incredible event, being led by, a pillar of fire and a cloud, and they're saying here that the same thing happened. Not maybe not literally like that, but the same type of protection. Just another parallel. Scriptures given to both societies speak of the strength of the Lord's hand in their deliverance. To those of ancient Israel, Moses said, "Remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place." I just highlighted the part about scriptures, because there's that belief that this hidden group of Israelites, the 10 lost tribes, are going to come. They're going to have prophets that presumably had been with them ever since the Assyrian conquest, and that they've had scriptures this whole time. But look at what we have today, right? We have the Book of Mormon that comes from the Nephites. We also have the Doctrine and Covenants, because it seems that we have prophets that are among the 10 lost tribes in Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and of course Joseph Smith basically received almost all the revelation that went into the Doctrine and Covenants. But I think that you could make that case, and I've also made the case in my 10 Lost Tribes playlist that excuse me, there are other groups like the Pashtuns, the Kochins, I believe that there's, again, I'm going to do a deep dive into the British Isles. There's also a group that in Japan that claim to be of the Lost 10 Tribes and others. And it's not too difficult to imagine that they probably did maintain their religion for a while before being conquered by either Islam or whatever the regional religion or nation was, and those those records probably got destroyed, with maybe some of them being preserved, and maybe that's going to come about. And so, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls, there may be other scriptures out there that'll be discovered that will be added to our canon of scripture. Okay, we're going to skip down here. The Israelites gratefully celebrated their exodus from Egypt. The Latter-day Saints commemorated their exodus with the establishment of the world headquarters of the restored church in the tops of the mountains. All celebrants acclaimed their deliverance by God. And what do you know? What do you know? Look at the scripture here that's being referenced. Jeremiah 23, 7 and 8. It's these scriptures. Do you think that President Nelson, and at the time Elder Nelson, believed that there was a group of the 10 lost tribes in the North Country, whether that's under the ice caps, Greenland, Siberia, Canada, Alaska, whatever? I don't think, he's not going to put in a talk like this anything that's contentious, because as far as I know, that this kind of belief system has been around in the church for a while, and this is probably a way that he's kind of refuting it just simply by writing this entire talk, because it basically goes against using this the way that it has been by those that believe that there's that group, right? He's basically just flat out referencing that scripture here in the context of this entire speech. So, and now he's the prophet. He has the keys of the gathering. I think we need to think about that. All right, timeless gospel principles. Scriptures available to ancient and modern Israel include timeless principles of the gospel. You may be familiar with the prophecy of Isaiah. Thou shalt be brought down and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. Could any words have been more descriptive of the Book of Mormon, coming as it did out of the ground to whisper out of the dust to people of our day? Interesting. Let's see, was there anything else? Just a couple more things down here. No, I'm just going to skip over that. I feel pretty good about what we've talked about. I don't want this to go too long. So, yeah, after reading this article, especially the person that wrote this talk for the fireside, I don't think there's any doubt. I don't think there's any doubt about what this scripture is referring to, having been referenced by now President Russell M. Nelson, in regards to the similarities between modern day Israel, which is the term that he uses for us, modern day Israel, and it is literal for a lot of us, those that come from certain ancestries, and of course others may be adopted into the church, and that's fine too. But we're mostly talking about whether there is really a group of 10 lost tribes that are just unknown to the world, that are yet to come forth, or if it's actually, these scriptures are actually already being fulfilled and have been fulfilled, right? Because people that are waiting for that group to come from the North Country, quote unquote, they think that this has not been fulfilled yet. But it seems like in reality, to me, in my opinion, it has been fulfilled. This is done. And it's actually, you know, verse 8, it's still ongoing, but it's been initiated. This doesn't seem to be talking about that literal group that's going to come up out of the ocean or whatever, and then a highway is going to come up out of the ocean that's made of ice, and they're going to walk over, and, and then the whole world is going to be amazed. Um, sorry, I don't mean it. I don't think so, guys. I don't think so. What are your thoughts about this? Are you, you know, are you seeing this at all the same way that I am? Like, are you able to take in this new information and, you know, is there some, am I interpreting this wrong? What are your thoughts about all this? You think that President Nelson has these thoughts about the similarities between the Exodus and the modern day Exodus and gathering, but you think that there's still like, no, it's going to be even greater. They're going to come from outer space, and they're going to actually intervene in a new American Civil War, and then no one will dare come up against Zion. Like, I feel like that's what I've heard from many different people, and I don't know. I think that's probably looking beyond the mark. But again, I don't know. But I feel like this article alone is good enough evidence to support the idea that, well, just what I've been saying. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that this was interesting. I hope that you learned something new. I'll leave this link in the description below. So yeah, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, hit the notification bell, leave your comments, and especially if you have comments with sources, because that's how we can forward the research on this channel. And then I would also appreciate it if you share this content to help support the channel as well. And I'll talk to you guys later.